The galaxy was on the edge of extinction. Alien fleets had swept across the stars, overpowering every defense humanity had left. Whole colonies had fallen, their cities reduced to rubble, their inhabitants either enslaved or wiped out. The remaining human strongholds were in tatters, barely hanging on against the overwhelming might of the Coalition, a powerful alliance of alien species. For years, humanity had fought a losing battle, and now, there was little hope left. The aliens had won. The Coalition's forces celebrated in their ships, high above the battle-scarred worlds they had conquered. Their commanders, a mix of reptilian, insectoid, and hulking warlords, had gathered in the grand war room aboard the flagship. They watched, cold and emotionless, as the last remnants of human resistance crumbled. The war was over, and the humans had lost. "We have destroyed them all," one of the alien leaders said, a dry hiss escaping from its mandibles. "The humans are finished. Their last stronghold is about to fall." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement, and the mood shifted from one of triumphant warlords to a quiet, almost bored satisfaction. They had conquered, they had destroyed, and now they could move on to the next challenge. The humans had been nothing more than a thorn in their side for too long. But now, that thorn had been completely removed. As the alien leaders began to plan their next conquest, something unexpected happened. On the far side of the galaxy, in a forgotten sector known as the Void, a signal was picked up. It was weak, barely detectable. The alien ship's sensors barely registered the faint energy pulse, but the officer in charge noticed it. His antennae twitched, and he immediately focused on the faint transmission. "What is this?" he muttered to himself, studying the screen. He repeated the scan, running it through various filters to make sure it wasn't an anomaly or some trick of the electromagnetic waves. It was real. A signal. A message. He called his superior, a grizzled veteran of many battles. The officer stepped into the room, raising an eyebrow as the signal was displayed on the monitor. "What's this?" he asked, clearly not interested in the faint static. "It's a signal, sir. It's coming from deep in the void. I don't know how, but it's there." The veteran warlord frowned. The void was a place known for its nothingness. No ships went there. It was a place of silence, a graveyard of forgotten systems, where stars went to die. The idea that anything, let alone a signal, could come from that forsaken space was both baffling and disturbing. "Run it through the translators," the commander ordered. "See if it's anything useful." The officer complied, his fingers flying across the control panel. As the transmission filtered through, the words became clearer. But the message was brief, a simple call for help. The officer could hardly believe it. "It's human," the officer said in shock, staring at the words on the screen. "It's from a human." The veteran warlord scoffed, unable to believe it. "Impossible. How could humans be sending a message from the void? They are finished. We've wiped them out. There's nothing left." "Sir, the signature matches human technology. It's unmistakable." The commander's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. It was absurd. Humanity had been all but erased from the galaxy. Their last remnants had either been destroyed or scattered across the stars, with no chance of regrouping. Yet here, in the silent void, came this faint whisper, a signal that was undeniably human. The message was simple: help. Humanity's last hope is in the void. "Track it," the veteran ordered. "We need to know where it's coming from." The officer quickly entered the coordinates into the ship's navigation system. The numbers flashed on the screen, and then his face paled. "It's impossible," he whispered. "It's coming from the coordinates of the human warship's last known location." The veteran warlord felt a chill run down his spine. The human warships were supposed to be destroyed. The Coalition had made sure of that. These ships had been humanity's final hope, built in secret, far away from the prying eyes of the alien forces. But that was years ago. They were supposed to be gone. Yet the message had come from the void, the very heart of space that no ship had ever dared to enter. The human warships were thought to be nothing but ghost stories. The Coalition had dismissed them long ago as nothing more than legends. And yet now, this faint signal appeared, a cry for help, and it came from the exact place where the warships had once been. "This is a mistake," the veteran warlord muttered. "It's some sort of trick, a human trap. No human ships could survive out there." But deep down, he knew. He felt it in his gut. The signal was real. The humans had somehow survived. And they had sent a warship, a human warship, back into the galaxy. "Send a reconnaissance fleet," the commander said. "Prepare for the worst. If they've truly returned, we need to know what we're dealing with." The veteran officer nodded and quickly relayed the orders. Soon, a fleet of coalition ships was moving toward the coordinates. It was a small fleet, only a handful of ships, not enough to risk a full assault, but it was enough to investigate. The question was, what would they find? As the ships moved toward the coordinates, the tension grew. The void was an inhospitable place, known for its lack of resources and the dangers hidden within its darkness. But something had called them here, something that was human. And the veteran warlord had a feeling that whatever it wasn't going to be what they expected. As the fleet entered the void, all eyes were fixed on the lead ship scanners. They scanned the surrounding emptiness, searching for any sign of the human warship. The tension in the air was thick, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the lead ship picked something up. A faint signal, growing stronger. The fleet closed in, and ahead, in the distance, they saw it. A shape emerging from the darkness. The human warship. Massive, old, and yet undeniably real. The alien forces watched in stunned silence as the warship broke through the void. Its silhouette loomed large against the blackness of space, a testament to humanity's survival. But there was something more. The warship was not just a relic. It was active, powered up, and clearly ready for battle. The veteran warlord's breath caught in his throat. This was no trick. The humans were back. And this time, they weren't going to be easy to defeat. The message had been clear. Humanity's last hope had emerged from the void. But what the coalition didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The human warship loomed in the distance, its massive form cutting through the cold void of space. The coalition's reconnaissance fleet watched it cautiously, every alien eye glued to the ship's every movement. The sheer size of the warship was staggering, its hull scarred but sturdy. It was an ancient vessel, designed for war, and despite the years of isolation, it seemed as powerful as ever. The veteran warlord's instincts screamed that something was wrong. No ship, no matter how advanced, should have survived this long in the void. Yet here it was, alive and well, its engines humming as it slowly turned toward the coalition fleet. The order was clear. The reconnaissance fleet had to assess the human warship, but there was an unspoken understanding among the fleet commanders. It was best to approach with extreme caution. The last thing they needed was to provoke a warship they knew little about. Their mission was to gather intelligence, not to start a battle they might not win. "Steady," the veteran warlord ordered, his voice tense as the fleet drew closer. "We can't afford to make any mistakes." The ships in the reconnaissance fleet held their formation, weapons powered down and shields at minimum strength. They moved closer to the human vessel, their sensors scanning every inch of it. But nothing could prepare them for what happened next. A single pulse of energy shot out from the warship, sending a shockwave through the fleet. The shock was enough to rattle the alien ships, their systems struggling to compensate for the sudden surge. The veteran warlord cursed under his breath. He hadn't expected a response so quick, let alone one so powerful. The human warship, though silent and seemingly dormant moments before, was now fully alert. It was as if it had sensed the approach of the coalition ships and decided to make a statement. The pulse was a warning, something that communicated the ship was ready for anything. The veteran warlord's fingers tightened around the armrest of his command chair as he weighed his options. He could retreat and return to the coalition's fleet, report what he had seen, but deep down he knew the message had been sent for a reason. The humans were not hiding in the void. They were waiting for something. And they had sent a warship to deliver a message. "We need to make contact," the officer beside him said, his voice tight. "We can't just leave without speaking to them. We need answers." The veteran warlord took a deep breath, considering the officer's words. All right, prepare the comms. But be careful. If they don't want to talk, we'll respect that. I want no sign of aggression unless they fire first. The officer nodded and quickly set up a direct communication link. The screen flickered to life, and a transmission window appeared in front of them. A moment of silence passed before a voice crackled through the speakers. This is Captain Elias of the warship Aegis. You have 5 minutes to explain why you are trespassing in human space. After that, you will leave or face consequences. The voice was calm, controlled, but carried a weight of authority that the veteran warlord had not expected. This wasn't just any human. This was a leader, a commander who had fought through the darkest of times to reach this point. The words were clear. Humanity had not given up. They had come back, and they had returned with strength. The veteran warlord's first instinct was to attack, to unleash the power of the coalition fleet and crush this small human force before it could grow. But something stopped him. There was no arrogance in the human captain's voice, no desperation. He sounded like someone who had nothing left to lose, but everything to protect. That kind of strength was dangerous. The warlord could feel it. This human warship was not here to beg for mercy. It was here to reclaim something lost, something the coalition had taken. We are the coalition, the warlord said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. We have no interest in starting a war with you. We only came to investigate the source of the distress signal you sent. Distress signal. Captain Elias' voice cut through the static, disbelief lacing his words. That was a warning, not a call for help. You have invaded human territory, and I don't intend to let you proceed any further. If you continue, we'll take that as a threat. Do not test me. The veteran warlord's mouth went dry. It was clear now, humanity was not begging for mercy, as he had feared. They had come back for something else, something far more important than survival. What had they returned to claim? And what kind of power was this human warship hiding? The warlord had seen the destruction it had wrought on his own fleet, but he still didn't understand the full extent of it. He needed to know more. I understand, the warlord said slowly, but we need to speak to your leaders. The galaxy is at a tipping point. The coalition's forces have secured almost all human space. We have won. What do you hope to achieve by returning now? There was a long pause. For a moment, the warlord thought the transmission had been cut off. But then Captain Elias spoke again, and his words struck like a hammer. You think you've won, Captain Elias said, his tone colder than the void outside. But the war isn't over. Not until every last one of you is driven from human space. And we will make sure that happens. You will not get away with what you've done. The warlord froze. What do you mean? We've already conquered your world. There's nothing left to fight for. Wrong, Elias said. You haven't won. You haven't conquered us. And you'll learn soon enough why you should never underestimate the human spirit. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the veteran warlord in stunned silence. For the first time in years, the coalition had encountered something they didn't understand, something that threatened their hold on the galaxy. The human warship had made it clear that this was not a lost cause. Humanity had returned, not to ask for help, but to demand justice. They were no longer the weak, desperate species the coalition had crushed before. They were something more. The veteran warlord clenched his fists, his mind racing. The next few moves would determine everything. But one thing was clear. Humanity's last hope had emerged from the void, and it was not going to back down. You said the transmission cut out, leaving a tense silence that filled the warlord's command room. The screen flickered once more before it was replaced by the view of the distant human warship, Aegis, which now appeared larger, more imposing than before. The veteran warlord, still processing the human captain's words, tried to keep his mind focused. This was not an enemy that could be easily dismissed or intimidated. Prepare for all scenarios, the warlord finally ordered, his voice low but steady. He turned to his officers, his eyes hardening with resolve. Signal the rest of the fleet. We will need backup if this turns into a full confrontation. We are not facing the same weak humans we thought we defeated. These ones are different. They're organized. The veteran officer beside him nodded and quickly relayed the orders to the fleet. The alien ships, still hovering near the human warship, began to circle cautiously, their weapons primed. The fleet was ready for whatever was to come. But as the ships closed in on the human vessel, no shots were fired. The silence between the two forces stretched on, heavy with anticipation. Back aboard the Aegis, Captain Elias stood, his hands resting on the cold steel surface of the command console. He had expected the coalition to retaliate, but this time, he wasn't going to let them have the upper hand. The Aegis was more than just a warship. It was a symbol of human resilience, a weapon built to challenge the overwhelming forces of the galaxy. Elias had commanded the ship through impossible odds before, and he was prepared to do it again. "Captain, the fleet is holding position," his communications officer reported, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. "They are waiting for us to make the first move." Elias nodded slowly, his mind racing. The coalition had come with the intention of neutralizing them. They didn't understand that this ship, this crew, had one singular mission: to reclaim humanity's rightful place among the stars. There was no turning back now. Tell them to stand down. If they want a fight, they'll get one. "But we're not here to waste time with diplomacy," Elias said. "We're here to end this." His crew moved quickly to relay the orders, and soon, the human warship activated its weapon systems. The engines hummed with power, and the shields flared to life, ready to withstand whatever the coalition might throw at them. On the alien ships, the warlord stared at the screens. His eyes narrowed as he saw the human warship power up. He hadn't expected this. The humans were not running. They were not begging for mercy. They were preparing for war. And that terrified him. "Captain, they're powering up their weapons." An officer called from across the room, urgency in his voice. The warlord watched in disbelief as the human warship activated its weapon systems. "Ready all guns," he ordered sharply. The alien fleet's shields flickered to life, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The human ship was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Its weapons were powerful enough to make even his advanced fleet worry. "Launch the first wave," the warlord barked. The coalition's ships fired first, massive beams of energy cutting through the vacuum of space toward the Aegis. The warlord waited, watching closely as the blasts drew closer, ready to witness the destruction of humanity's final hope. But then, with a sudden surge of power, the Aegis's shields flared brightly, absorbing the full force of the incoming fire. The human ship barely moved, its powerful shields holding firm. The warlord's eyes widened. The ship wasn't just surviving, it was withstanding their fire like it had been designed for this moment. He had underestimated the human ship's resilience, and now he could see it clearly. This wasn't just a warship, it was a fortress. The human captain's voice crackled over the communications channel once again, calm and composed as if he had anticipated this all along. "You've made your move," Elias said. "Now, let's see what you're really made of." Before the warlord could respond, the Aegis fired back. The energy from its weapons surged forward in a concentrated burst, slamming into the lead ship of the coalition fleet. The impact was catastrophic. The ship's shields faltered, and the blast tore through its hull with ease, sending the vessel spiraling out of control. "Return fire! All ships, return fire!" the warlord shouted, his voice now tinged with panic. But it was too late. The human warship was more than a mere relic, it was a force of destruction. The coalition ships fired again, but the human warship moved with unexpected agility, dodging their shots and retaliating with devastating precision. The warlord's mind raced. He had to think fast. The Aegis was proving far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. And it wasn't just the ship itself. The humans were fighting with a determination that suggested they had nothing left to lose. "We need to retreat," the officer beside the warlord shouted, his voice shaking. "No," the warlord growled. He wasn't ready to give up yet. "We can still win this." The fleet, now engaged in an all-out battle with the human warship, was losing ground fast. Another alien vessel was struck by a blast from the Aegis's main cannon, its engines erupting in a fiery explosion. The warlord's chest tightened as he watched his forces crumble before the power of a single ship. The communications officer turned toward the warlord, her face pale. "Sir, we have a problem. The rest of the fleet is reporting heavy damage. The Aegis is tearing through us." He could see it in their eyes. The crew knew it was only a matter of time before the human warship obliterated the entire fleet. There was no way to stop it now. The Aegis was a force beyond their control, and every shot it fired seemed to prove the point. "We have to pull back," the warlord muttered, his confidence shattered. But it was too late. The human warship had already sealed their fate. With a final devastating burst from the Aegis, the last of the coalition's ships was destroyed. The warlord watched helplessly as the screen before him went blank, the faint remains of his fleet scattering across the stars. Captain Elias's voice came through the comms once again. "This is the last warning. We are humanity's last hope, and we will not be stopped. Leave our space, or you will regret it." As the Aegis drifted back into the darkness, leaving the shattered remnants of the coalition fleet behind, the veteran warlord knew that he had underestimated humanity's resolve. And now, there was no turning back. The galaxy was about to change, and the war that had once seemed like a victory for the coalition was far from over. The aftermath of the battle hung in the silence of space, a grim reminder of the terrible power humanity had unleashed from the depths of the void. The shattered remains of the coalition fleet floated helplessly in the blackness, their once proud ships reduced to debris. The veteran warlord, once confident in the coalition's superiority, now found himself staring at the empty void, his thoughts consumed by the implications of the Aegis's victory. He knew they had underestimated the human warship, but what troubled him more was the realization that the humans were not just a broken race, clinging to survival. They were organized, focused, and they had technology far beyond what the coalition had expected. More than that, they were united under a single, unyielding purpose: reclaiming their galaxy. The warlord's mind raced, calculating the consequences of humanity's return. "We've been wrong all along," the officer beside him said, his voice somber. "We've underestimated them at every turn." The warlord didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the screen, replaying the moments of the battle. The Aegis had turned the tide with its power and precision, its shields holding up under the fiercest bombardment. The ship had responded with a deadly force, and the humans aboard it had fought with the fury of a species that had nothing left to lose. And now, the Aegis had vanished into the blackness, its threat lingering in the minds of every coalition officer. "We cannot allow them to continue," the warlord finally said, his voice hard and cold. "Humanity is a threat to the entire galaxy. They must be crushed before they grow stronger." He turned toward his communications officer. "Send a message to the Coalition High Command. We need reinforcements. We need to prepare for a full-scale war." The officer quickly complied, but the warlord's thoughts were elsewhere. As he sat in the cold command chair, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had not just come back to fight. It had come back with a vengeance. The Aegis was a symbol of that vengeance, a reminder that humans were no longer the weak, fragmented species the coalition had easily defeated before. Meanwhile, aboard the Aegis, Captain Elias stood on the bridge, his expression stern as he watched the viewscreen flicker with static. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The human warship was not alone. The Aegis was part of a much larger plan, one that had been set into motion long before the first shots were fired. Humanity had not simply returned to the galaxy to survive. They had returned to reclaim it. "We've done it," Elias said quietly to his first officer, his voice reflecting a mix of pride and determination. "But this is only the beginning. We have to keep pushing. The coalition will send everything they have at us. We can't stop now." The first officer, a seasoned veteran who had fought alongside Elias through countless battles, nodded. "They're not going to take us down so easily. We'll fight them until the last ship." Elias turned toward the crew, his eyes scanning their faces. They were all tired, worn from the battle, but there was an unshakable resolve in their eyes. They had done the impossible. They had stood against the overwhelming force of the coalition, and they had won. But Elias knew that their victory had only fueled the fire. The coalition would not rest until humanity was completely eradicated. And that meant the Aegis would be at the center of their target. Prepare the fleet for the next phase, Elias ordered. We need to get to the human colonies. They need to know we're back. They need to know there's still hope. The crew moved quickly, carrying out the orders with precision. Elias stepped away from the command console and moved to a small viewport, looking out at the vast emptiness of space. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't just leading a warship anymore. He was leading humanity's last chance. The communications officer approached him, a solemn look on her face. Captain, there's a transmission from High Command. They are requesting your presence. Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself. The time had come to talk to the leaders of the human resistance, to take the fight to the coalition and show them that humanity would never be silenced again. Put it through, Elias said. The screen flickered, and soon a stern-faced officer appeared on the display. Behind her stood a group of other officers, their expressions grave. Captain Elias, the officer began, her voice formal. You've done what we thought impossible. The Aegis has proven humanity's strength, and we're sending everything we can to support you. But we need to know what comes next. The coalition will regroup quickly. They won't give up easily. Elias nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I've already seen what they're capable of. We need to hit them hard, hit them fast. We can't wait for them to recover. We need to keep them on the defensive. The officer on the screen paused for a moment before continuing. We've started organizing a fleet to support you, but it will take time. In the meantime, your warship will be the tip of the spear. The human colonies are waiting for a sign, for something to give them hope. You're not just fighting for survival anymore, Captain. You're fighting for the future of every human being left in the galaxy. Elias's jaw tightened. The weight of the officer's words settled over him. The future of humanity rested on his shoulders. The Aegis wasn't just a warship anymore. It was a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for every human left in the galaxy. We'll be ready, Elias said, his voice resolute. We won't let them take our galaxy. Humanity will rise again. And this time, we'll do it together. The transmission ended, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts. The fight was far from over. The coalition would retaliate, and they would throw everything they had at humanity. But they had underestimated the humans once already. They would not make that mistake again. The Aegis would lead the charge, and with it, the entire human race would fight to reclaim their place in the stars. As the warship drifted silently through the stars, Elias knew one thing for certain. The next battle would define the future of the galaxy, and humanity would not go down without a fight. The Aegis moved steadily through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming with a quiet power that contrasted sharply with the chaos and destruction that had unfolded in the past days. The battle with the coalition's fleet was only the beginning, but Captain Elias knew the war was far from over. They had won a significant victory, yes, but the coalition wouldn't let this stand. They would regroup, rebuild, and come back with a vengeance. Elias stood at the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the endless void. The stars stretched out before him, a silent reminder of what was at stake. Humanity's return to the galaxy had been heralded by the Aegis's emergence from the void, but now, the task was to make sure the rest of the galaxy knew they were still alive, still a force to be reckoned with. Captain, we've received new intelligence, said the communications officer, breaking the silence. She turned toward him, her eyes focused. The coalition is consolidating their forces at the edge of human space. They're planning a counteroffensive. Elias didn't flinch. He had expected this. The coalition wouldn't be content with just the loss of one fleet. They would be preparing for the next phase of their invasion. Where exactly? Elias asked, his voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. An asteroid belt just outside of the Epsilon system. The officer replied, her fingers flying over the console. It's a key strategic point. They'll be able to block any human ships trying to pass through to the colonies. Elias nodded, his mind already turning over the possibilities. The coalition had control of the outer reaches of human space, and they knew the Epsilon system was crucial to cutting off human access to the heart of the galaxy. If they were to make any move forward, they would have to take that asteroid belt and force the coalition to retreat. The Aegis couldn't do it alone, not with the limited resources it had. "We need to move fast," Elias said, turning to his first officer. "Send a message to the resistance leaders. I want every available ship to meet us at Epsilon. We have to take that belt before the coalition can fortify it." "Aye, Captain," the first officer responded, and quickly relayed the orders. As the crew worked in a flurry of activity, preparing for the next phase of the operation, Elias remained lost in thought. They had a slim window of opportunity, and he knew that every move had to count. The coalition's next strike would likely be their strongest. But the humans had something that their enemies didn't: determination. "Captain," the communications officer interrupted again, "I've received a response from High Command. They've confirmed reinforcements, but we'll need time to assemble them. The Aegis is the only ship we have in position right now." Elias turned to face her, his gaze sharp. "We don't have time. The Aegis is going in alone, whether reinforcements arrive or not." The crew on the bridge shifted uneasily, but there was no argument. Elias's authority was absolute. He had earned their trust, and his resolve was unwavering. They had come this far together, and they would continue to fight together. "Prepare for jump to Epsilon," Elias ordered. "And tell the fleet to move in as soon as they arrive. We'll start the assault without them if we have to." With the orders given, the bridge became a hive of activity as the crew readied the warship for the journey to Epsilon. They all knew what was at stake. This battle would decide humanity's next move in the Galactic War. The coalition would fight tooth and nail to hold the asteroid belt, and the Aegis would be the hammer that struck first. As the Aegis plunged into hyperspace, Elias found himself staring at the map of the galaxy displayed on the command console. The stars blurred into streaks of light as they traveled faster than light, heading toward the Epsilon system. His mind, however, was already racing ahead, calculating their approach, their tactics, their next steps. He had been leading battles for years, but this was different. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity still had a place in the stars. The Aegis wasn't just a warship. It was humanity's last stand, their symbol of defiance. But Elias knew that to truly reclaim their place, humanity would have to win more than just this battle. They would have to outsmart, outfight, and outlast their enemies. When they arrived in the Epsilon system, the sight before them was both reassuring and terrifying. The asteroid belt loomed large, its jagged rocks and debris floating in an intricate web. It was a natural barrier, but one that the coalition had learned to use to their advantage. The human resistance was scattered across various sectors, but none of them were prepared for the scale of what they were about to face. "This is it," Elias muttered to himself, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. The Aegis emerged from hyperspace, and the asteroid belt stretched out before them, a vast field of floating rocks and debris. The coalition had already set up a defensive perimeter, their ships scattered among the asteroids, camouflaged against the rocky terrain. The battle would be fought in the shadows of these ancient space formations, and there was no telling what surprises the coalition might have waiting. "Captain, we're receiving a communication from the fleet," the communications officer said, her voice steady. "They've arrived and are ready for action." Elias exhaled in relief. They weren't alone in this fight after all. The reinforcements were here, just in time. "Good," Elias said. "All ships, prepare for combat. We're going in." The battle would be fierce. The coalition would fight hard to keep their hold on the asteroid belt, but Elias knew they could not back down. The future of humanity depended on breaking through this first line of defense. They had no choice but to push forward, to strike with everything they had. As the Aegis and the fleet of resistance ships moved into position, the veteran warlord's voice echoed in Elias's mind. He could almost hear the challenge in his words: "You will never defeat us. You will never reclaim what's ours." But Elias was ready. The Aegis was ready. And humanity was ready to rise again. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to fight. The battle for the asteroid belt had begun. The battle for the Epsilon asteroid belt began as the Aegis and its fleet of resistance ships surged forward into the heart of the Coalition's defensive perimeter. The vast expanse of floating rock and debris created a chaotic backdrop, but Elias knew this terrain better than anyone. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the galaxy's future. The Coalition ships were well positioned, their vessels camouflaged within the asteroid field, using the jagged rocks for cover. They had made this their fortress. But what the Coalition failed to understand was that humanity had the will to win, and that alone would give them an advantage. All ships, spread out. Don't let them corner us, Elias ordered, his voice steady but filled with a commanding presence. He could feel the pulse of the ship under his feet, the Aegis coming alive with the hum of its weapon systems powering up. The crew was ready. The warship was ready. But the Coalition would not make this easy. The first shot came from the Coalition, a burst of plasma fire that cut through the silence of space. It missed its target by a wide margin, but the intent was clear. The Coalition wasn't waiting to be provoked. They were coming for the humans, with everything they had. "We've got incoming," the tactical officer shouted, his voice breaking through the tension. "They are firing from the left flank." Elias turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the battlefield. The enemy fleet was coming at them in waves, with dozens of ships emerging from behind asteroids, firing energy beams and missile barrages. The Aegis shook under the assault, but the human warships' shields held, flashing with every impact. The battle had begun, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. "Return fire," Elias commanded. "All guns, target the lead ship. Take it down before they regroup." The Aegis's massive cannons fired, a barrage of energy blasts streaking out toward the Coalition ships. One by one, enemy vessels were struck, their shields flickering before they crumpled under the force of the human weaponry. The Aegis's precision targeting system was unmatched, and every shot hit its mark. The human fleet followed suit, launching their own counterattacks as they closed in on the Coalition forces. But even as the enemy ships began to fall, the Warlord's fleet proved just how deadly they could be. The remaining Coalition vessels adapted quickly, working in coordinated formations, trying to outmaneuver the Aegis and its allies. The Aegis was fast, but the Coalition was relentless. "Captain, they're coming in from all sides," the first officer reported, urgency in his voice. "We need to break their formation before they box us in." Elias clenched his fists. He had known this would happen. When the battle shifted to the asteroid field, it would turn into a deadly dance, each ship trying to gain the upper hand in the maze of rocks and debris. It would be easy for either side to get trapped, and the smaller ships in the human fleet were especially vulnerable. "Tell the fleet to break off into smaller units," Elias ordered, his mind racing. "We can't let them surround us. I'll take the Aegis through the center. We need to create a gap for the others to move through." With a series of tactical maneuvers, the Aegis launched forward, weaving between asteroids with skillful precision. The human warship was a deadly serpent, twisting and turning through the rocks, dodging fire and returning devastating shots. As the Aegis cut through the heart of the Coalition's fleet, the surrounding ships found themselves scattered and disorganized. But even as they made progress, the Warlord knew the battle was far from won. His fleet might be in disarray, but they weren't defeated yet. A call came through from the rear guard of the Coalition forces. "Captain, we have reinforcements incoming," the officer reported urgently. "The Vanguard and Viper are on their way. We'll turn this around." Elias's heart sank. The Coalition wasn't done yet. They had more ships waiting in the wings, and now, with fresh reinforcements, the tide could turn against them. The Aegis's shields flickered again, this time more weakly. The barrage of fire from all sides was taking its toll. "How long until we have full support from the fleet?" Elias demanded. 2 minutes, the officer replied. "But we might not last that long." Elias gritted his teeth. They had to hold on, just 2 more minutes. That was all they needed to finish what they had started. He turned to the tactical officer, his mind sharp and focused. "We're going in. Prepare to engage the Vanguard and Viper when they arrive. We need to break them before they get in range." The Aegis turned once more, diving back into the fray, its weapons charged and ready. The remaining coalition ships were closing in, but they underestimated the speed and agility of the human warship. The Aegis zigzagged between the asteroids, dodging fire and firing back with deadly accuracy. The chaos of the asteroid field only served to enhance the human advantage. Every move had to be calculated, but Elias's crew was prepared. They had trained for this moment. The reinforcements arrived just in time, the first wave of human ships emerging from hyperspace. They charged in with reckless abandon, smashing into the rear flank of the coalition fleet. The coalition ships tried to regroup, but the damage was already done. With the Aegis leading the charge, the human fleet pushed forward, cutting through the weakened coalition forces like a blade through paper. The warlord watched in disbelief as his fleet began to falter, the chaos of the battlefield overwhelming even the most seasoned commanders. His ships were falling apart, one by one. There was no way they could stop the tide of humanity's assault. His last hope was slipping away, and he knew it. "Captain, we've broken through," the communications officer cried. "The Vanguard is retreating. They can't hold us off any longer." A roar of victory went up from the human fleet. Elias allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The battle might be turning in their favor, but the war was far from over. "We've taken the asteroid belt," Elias said, his voice steady but resolute. "Now, we move forward. The coalition may have regrouped, but they're not ready for us yet. We're going to finish this, once and for all." The Aegis stood triumphant in the debris of the battle, its crew battered but not broken. As Elias watched the remains of the coalition fleet retreating into the darkness of space, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity's fight for the galaxy had only just begun. The aftermath of the battle in the Epsilon asteroid belt had left the coalition in disarray. The Aegis and the human resistance fleet stood victorious, but the cost had been high. Wounded ships limped away from the battlefield, their hulls scorched and their crews battered. The vast field of asteroids was now littered with the wreckage of both human and coalition vessels, the silent remains of a fierce struggle for control of one of the galaxy's most strategic points. Captain Elias stood on the bridge of the Aegis, gazing out at the debris field through the viewport. His mind was focused, calculating the next steps. The battle had been a decisive victory, but he knew it was only one skirmish in a much larger war. The coalition would regroup, lick their wounds, and come back with reinforcements. They couldn't afford to waste time celebrating. "Captain, we've secured the asteroid belt," his first officer said, breaking the silence. "But we need to move quickly. The coalition will likely send a larger force to retake this position." Elias nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. "We can't give them the chance to recover. We'll push forward, strike at their core. The galaxy is still ours for the taking." "High Command is calling for an update," the communications officer added. "They want to know our next move." Elias turned toward the communications officer. "Put them through," he said, his voice firm. A moment later, the screen flickered to life, and the face of a high-ranking officer appeared, flanked by several others in a dimly lit room. The officer's stern expression was a stark contrast to the victorious scene that had unfolded only hours earlier. "Captain Elias," the officer said, "we've been following your progress. The battle was a success, but we need to understand what comes next. The coalition will retaliate in full force. The Epsilon system is critical for our push into the heart of their territory." Elias stood tall, his eyes unwavering. "We hold the Epsilon system. We cannot afford to lose it. But we need to move quickly. I'm recommending a direct assault on the coalition's supply lines. If we hit their logistics, we can cripple their ability to keep this war going. We take out their resources, and we win." The officer on the screen studied Elias carefully, then nodded. "You've got the go-ahead, Captain. High Command agrees. Do what you must, but be careful. The coalition is not one to underestimate, and they will retaliate in full." Elias gave a short nod. "Understood. We'll move immediately. I'll keep you updated on our progress." As the transmission ended, Elias turned to his crew, his eyes filled with resolve. We strike at the heart of the coalition. We hit their supply lines. If we can choke their resources, they won't be able to maintain this war. His crew went into motion immediately, executing the plan with efficiency. The Aegis wasn't just a symbol of humanity's defiance, it was the spearhead of the new human resistance, and Elias would lead it to victory. Hours later, the Aegis emerged from hyperspace near a massive coalition mining facility, located just outside of a distant star system. The facility was the lifeblood of the coalition's war effort, extracting precious resources from the star's nearby planets. It supplied fuel, weapons, and materials for the vast fleet that had been ravaging human space. If humanity could destroy this facility, the coalition would lose its ability to continue the war at the scale it had been waging. "Captain, we're on approach to the facility," the tactical officer reported. "It's well defended, but we can take it." Elias stood, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the holographic display of the facility. It was heavily shielded, surrounded by a ring of defensive platforms. Dozens of coalition warships patrolled the area, ensuring no enemy ship could get close without being obliterated. "We'll need to hit them hard and fast," Elias said, his mind working through the strategy. "We'll divide our forces. The Aegis will engage their main defenses, drawing their attention while the rest of the fleet attacks the mining complex directly. We're going in hot, but we need to neutralize their fleet first." The crew moved with practiced precision. Every moment mattered now. The Aegis advanced, and the human fleet followed, positioning itself for a swift, brutal attack. Firing range in 10 seconds, the weapons officer called. "Engage," Elias ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. The Aegis unleashed its weapons with ruthless precision. Energy blasts erupted from the warship, tearing through the enemy defenses. The coalition warships attempted to retaliate, but they were caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of the human assault. The Aegis moved swiftly, dodging incoming fire and returning it with devastating force. "Direct hit on their shield generators," the tactical officer reported. "The main defenses are down. We've breached their perimeter." Elias's gaze never wavered. "Good. Now, take out their mining facility. We need to cripple their resources." The Aegis turned toward the mining complex, its weapons firing once again. The facility's outer walls crumpled under the barrage, sending debris flying into space. The remaining coalition warships attempted to regroup, but they were no match for the coordinated assault that followed. One by one, the enemy ships were eliminated, their wreckage floating lifelessly in the debris field. The Aegis cut through them like a knife through butter. The mining complex, now exposed and vulnerable, began to fall apart as well, its core systems imploding under the intense firepower of the human assault. "Facility destroyed," the communications officer reported. "The coalition's supply line is severed. They won't be able to resupply their fleet for months." Elias allowed himself a brief smile, but he knew this wasn't the end. The battle had been fierce, but the war was far from over. The coalition would regroup, and the next phase would be even more dangerous. However, this victory had shown humanity's strength and determination. They had struck at the heart of the coalition's war machine, and now the galaxy would see what humanity was truly capable of. As the Aegis pulled away from the destroyed facility, Elias looked out at the stars ahead. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "We've made our mark. Now, we finish what we started." Humanity's fight was far from over, but they had taken a critical step toward reclaiming their place in the stars. And no force, no matter how powerful, would stop them now.